absences. A couple months ago, I was fortunate enough to do some traveling in Europe. Due to this, we have been waiting a bit longer than anticipated for some things to materialize. However, Damon and I had some good conversations about travel and some experiences I had while I was away. And so, in the meantime, I will present the final thoughts from those conversations here. As long as I can remember, I have walked. Going to school, up until the age of 16, I would choose to walk over taking the bus or other transportation. My family and I would often go camping for vacation, which involved a lot of walking, both together and on my own. Walking to friends' houses, to the corner store or mall, to anywhere. It was always the choice. Even after I was old enough to drive, most nights would be spent wandering the neighborhood at night, if I was home, listening to music and thinking. When I moved to Phoenix permanently, that all changed. Phoenix is widely known as being one of the least walkable cities in the United States, let alone the rest of the world. Where cities like New York, London, or Hong Kong are vertically oriented, the Phoenix metro area is more horizontally oriented. A melding of multiple townships, each with a small city center of more stereotypical buildings. If you want to go somewhere, chances are it is tediously farther than you realize. And beyond that, my work often involves a lot of walking, further banalizing something in which I once found so much joy. So, I had to find new meaning for walking. My new meaning became travel and vacation, and in turn, my personal philosophy of travel conglomerated itself around this. Destinations are chosen for that which might be experienced primarily through walking. Oftentimes, no extensive plans are made beyond the destination and length of stay. I do my best to fall into pace with the locals, don't be in the way whenever possible, take the routes locals take, eat where the locals eat, and so on. I do my best to experience the history of a place. And lastly, the sole focus while at the destination ought to be the destination and experience thereof. Taking pictures should be limited. In recent years, I must admit, this last guideline has become more lax, but there was a time where I would refuse to take pictures at all, as a rule of thumb. The reason for this change is due to the fragility of my memory more recently, and, to quote Dostoevsky, revisiting spots where I was once happy. But what made me happy about those places I had been, and was it authentic? What does it actually mean to be a tourist? This question has become louder in my mind the further I venture away from home, and so, using this recent trip to Europe as an example, I will seek to answer those questions. A couple quick notes about that. Firstly, the irony of me being someone with the opportunity to travel intercontinentally, asking these questions about authentic travel experience is certainly not lost on me. My hope is that by the end of this, the answer to this question will suggest an importance on walking, not on being a non-tourist tourist. This is not specifically a philosophy on travel, but a philosophy of ontology, of Dasein and in der Weltsein. Secondly, it may seem at first to be a base critique of beautiful places and perhaps a lack of appreciation. This is not the case, but in order to draw out the beauty, the critique must give the context here. Lastly, this will include words in French, Greek, Hungarian, Czech, and Latin. I will do my best, but please forgive any mispronunciations. As it turns out, others have wondered about walking and the experience of being there. One individual was Guy Debord, along with his counterparts in the Situationist International. In Theory of the Dérive, Debord writes, "In a dérive, one or more persons during a certain period drop their relations, their work and leisure activities, and all their other usual motives for movement and action, and let themselves be drawn by the attractions of the terrain and the encounters they find there. Chance is a less important factor in this activity than one might think. From a dérive point of view, cities have psychogeographical contours with constant currents, fixed points, and vortexes that strongly discourage entry into or exit from certain zones." End quote. The dérive has also been described as a technique of rapid passage through varied ambiances, or enclaves felt through their psychogeographic qualities. This idea of psychogeography is defined as the study of the precise laws and specific effects of the geographical environment, consciously organized or not, on the emotions and behavior of individuals. Notice the definition here of psychogeography is to be strictly important in relation to the environment itself. What we can find to be causally true of an environment psychologically is implied by the former. That is, the laws and effects of the environment, and not the latter, the emotions and behavior of individuals. While Debord suggests that chance is not as important as one may think on a dérive, the ways in which it is present become irreplaceable. I will explain this fully later. While traveling, I was sure to keep these things in mind as we went. After some rough travel days at the beginning, we found ourselves at the first stop on the island of Naxos. On the first day, fully engaging with my rule of not making plans ahead of time, we were allowed to fully immerse in the dérive. We were led through narrow alleys of white buildings, plants growing out of walls and roofs, and shops lining the lower levels. Through there, we were then guided past restaurants, more shops, and small stands along the main road toward the sea. A small piece of land juts into the water next to the main port of entry, upon which rests the marble gate of the Temple of Apollo, originally built in 530 BC. This is a popular spot for tourists at sunset, in case one might get a good picture. Small villages can be found up into the mountains inland, specifically Feloti and Aperantos, in which beautiful vistas are found after passing through stretches of shops. In Athens, this dichotomy is even sharper. I came to realize that souvenirs and various mementos or local artisan pieces are shipped to the islands and given an image of faux isolation, and the prices follow. Interestingly, and even further, almost identical items turned out to be widely available on Amazon. In the case of Athens, I watched people engaging in these shops and compared that to how people engage with the monuments themselves found on the Acropolis and other historical sites. The debate for which simulated items to take home averaged a greater amount of time than that spent viewing the sites themselves, except of course in those cases of having their picture taken. My own approach to the transactional is to venture further into the smaller towns and areas where locals live and exist. I tend to find antique shops in order that I might find things I could actually use in the same ways the people there use them. I thought this could be fruitful with our dérive, to get a better feel of where we were visiting and have it imprinted on us. In some ways it was successful, but only in the ways we spoke with people and were able to get a glimpse of their lives as parents, siblings, and children. However, I came to realize in general that I was engaging in a fatal strategy, and to further call upon Jean Baudrillard, the desire to acquire antiques is symbolic of the, quote, nostalgia for origins and the obsession with authenticity, end quote. In truth, I was engaging in a fetish of authenticity, attempting and failing to overcome my lack of geographical contingency through the materialistic attempt at time delocation, an impossibility as it is. My fetishization of these sundry objects relegate them to, and in an attempt to symbolize a possessed central mythology, a, quote, fantasy whereby a projected detail comes to stand for the ego and the rest of the world is then organized around it. Further, the relation is ultimately transactional, thus infected by capital and a failed attempt to experience someone's authentic life through commoditization. This concept hit its peak when I realized the extent to which the historical monuments themselves become subjected to a fundamental lack, as if their respective values could be ascertained and the extent to which their facsimiles could be purchased and possessed. Thus, I decided I had to find a better meaning through the experiential, which in turn requires walking. This becomes the case, but only after a certain point I will explain in a moment. Before that, however, I found some interesting qualities revealing themselves. Even though I had assumed the mistake of the transactional, it was still a constant threat in moving from one place to another, regardless of intention. It also became clear to me that, in visiting the ancient ruins and historical sites, I was engaging with the same metaphysical process of time delocation. But instead of the effect of the purchased object, it was a more contoured and chronotic variant of the big other, manifest through psychological mania. This mania was engendered through the psychogeographical apprehension of time itself. In the presence of the historical loss of life and the evidence of material erasure in these monuments, we are castrated in the same way as Uranus, cut off from nature and cast aside, separate but connected. After the initial shock of the crowds and the attempt of the dérive to find meaning in the historical, I realized I had been trying way too hard. As Debord says, chance is less important than one might think. I found it to be important insofar as one's intentions manifests itself psychologically. My intention overtook the environment itself. Therefore, I was committing the fraud of forgetting the definition of psychogeography, that the environment must inform the psychological awareness thereof. Additionally, the ways in which we come to understand an environment happens over the course of time. I had been attempting to move outside of time in my experience of a place, And with this realization, after a certain period of time in each place, I began to see the cities I was visiting as I would see my own. The various sites of expenditure and the places in which capitalist capture is minimal. The chimneys and gutters, the door locks and alleys, the personal gardens and apartment balconies. In particular, the city plumbing infrastructure from building to sewer became fascinating to me, both in their similarities and differences to the systems I am used to. It was in this way I could unlock the experiences I would take with me, or more accurately, the manner in which I should experience in general. And nowhere was this more true than in cemeteries and ossuaries. These spaces for death and remembrance, often held within parks or churches, offer a more direct yet personal and intuitive opportunity for intention to motivate the dérive in an effective way. Further, these spaces connect with a possible world at which Bataille hints, wherein it was possible to lose oneself in ecstasy. One of the more successful attempts at our dérive occurred when, at the first cemetery of Athens, we chose a path based upon the sights and sounds we came upon. The first site was the Church of St. Theodore, which led to a particular arrangement of cypress trees that summoned us off to the east and ultimately an open tomb with visible human remains, one of the more profound moments of the entire trip for me. I find it interesting that in the moment, the idea of taking a picture never crossed my mind. From there, we followed a path without direction until we came up to the Holy Church of St. Lazarus. On this day in particular, there was an Orthodox funeral service happening, and with the half-sung, half-chanted service taking place, we followed the environment until we came upon a statue known as the Sleeping Female Figure. I'm sure there are interpretations that can be extracted there, something about the sleeping majesty of an Athens unburdened by excessive tourism and the commodification of useless items. But I think the irony in stating it assuredly might just be too much, and would take away from the memory of the moments lining up and what it meant in its immediacy. Nothing to buy, nothing to sell, nothing to take. I had similar experiences while visiting the Vyšehrad Cemetery and the adjoining Basilica of St. Peter and St. Paul in Prague. The other important moment I had in this sense happened when going to the famous Sedlec ossuary in Kutna Hora. While we happened upon the first cemetery of Athens in a vague, planless way, I had very strong intentions of going to the ossuary. Upon arriving, I was greeted with the sight of ornate, arranged piles, chandeliers, sconces, and various other ornamentations, all made of human bones. Unlike the cemeteries we visited, there was an entrance fee and a variety of souvenirs for purchase. The result of that trip, while something I thoroughly enjoyed, was somewhat underwhelming in a phenomenological sense, and did not yield as meaningful an experience in relation to the dérive. So what was the difference between visiting historical monuments and a cemetery? For me, the main difference is how time is felt. At the Parthenon, time seems a profoundly apersonal manifestation of death when considered historically. In the presence of something very old, there is that sense of lack, of the passing of human generations without purpose, and the fear that what we do doesn't matter, a la Dylan Thomas. Death in this way is that which has the power to cut off personal potential. However, the cemetery grants one the apprehension of death as such, which is the most personal thing of all. There is a feeling of welcome, of the ultimate destination, and a connection with something to which we all belong. Most cemeteries are indistinguishable from parks. Thus, I consider Spinoza's Deus sive natura, God or nature, and the idea that the God of humanity is the force of death toward which we are all continuously circling. Another very effective dérive happened in Budapest at the Városliget, or City Park. This is without a doubt the greatest park I have ever walked. We didn't know anything about it before deciding to go check it out, and much like the first cemetery of Athens, we chose to experience it by following the pull of the environment itself. This ultimately led to the accidental discovery of the Voie de Hunyad Castle, a fascinating building and a surprising pastiche of the different architectural periods in Budapest. Regardless of the motivation for the building itself, it feels like a proper method of time delocation in the sense that its visual and physical presence demands reverence and a sense of lostness in relation. A moment of synchronicity was revealed when, while viewing a courtyard at this castle, I noticed the statue of the Hungarian nobleman Ignác Darani with the inscription Si monumentum caeris circumspice. Anyone familiar with Despel Omega will be very aware of where this phrase comes from and the implications for us here. However, the most crucial moment for me occurred during a trip to the Czech town of Český Krumlov. We decided to go there due to the reputation and the recommendations it had from other tourists, so going into it, we were already at a methodological disadvantage. However, we were sure to walk from the train station to regain some opportunity. We walked through a neighborhood admiring the apple trees and gardens, and then down a steep path through trees on one side and a generous view of the state castle and downtown area on the other. We experienced the architecture and streams and the brick streets on the way toward the castle. After you walk over the Cloak Bridge inside the castle, there is a small cafe and a viewpoint on the left. While standing there looking over the town on a cloudy day, I began laughing at the unreal beauty, but then I became emotional. I became aware of the phantasmic quality of the view I was looking at, the phenomenological illusion with which I was engaging. In that moment, the history of the place became incredibly obvious, not in the sense that I was able to reconnect through some nostalgia for origins or that I had a clear understanding of what may have gone into the construction and so on. Instead, I became aware that I was looking at the remnants of a corpse, of something that should no longer exist. Its continued existence at this point now only serves as an economic spectacle. What I was experiencing was a lost future of sorts. A psychogeographical rupture apprehended through the liminal feeling of an uncanny world without the infection of capital, which ultimately was not there, as if I was seeing the archetypal rather than the actual. With regard to our present world, history plays itself out in two ways. Either it is a site of a time and place that is no longer attainable, but is physically and temporally extended for the purposes of economic vampirism, or a place is made to look as if it has historical value, yet it ultimately serves to smooth out some capitalistic flow. An example of this latter might be something like Grand Central Station in New York City. This twofold aspect of history suggests that history as such can be viewed as significant by the extent to which it can be commodified. In this process, an interesting thing happens in the mind of the tourist. They experience what they believe to be something properly historical, but it is actually a psychological simulacrum founded upon a series of epistemic approximations. It may be true that a location of an object has historical significance, but the manner in which we attempt to experience it necessarily leads to the creation of fantasy. This is a form of fantasy only possible by the mediation of capital and exchange. Similar ideas to this can be found in Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man, as well as the idea of time and space compressions in David Harvey's The Condition of Postmodernity. The examples of this aspect of our modern historical understanding are numerous. A basic one can be understood through our empirical valuations between objects and their simulated images. While walking through Budapest and Prague, especially in the Old Town Square of the latter, I couldn't help but find reference through my experience watching Disney movies as a child. Additionally, we can look at the aforementioned commodification of historical sites through their serialized reproduction into paperweights, necklaces, and sundry items. A trinketification, if you will. This is all to say that there is an aspect to our experiential apprehension of the historical, in which we sense a lostness to the historical significance to a place or communal environment. This can psychologically manifest itself in a couple ways. When viewing a historical site, one may feel a certain lostness to the context in which the past individuals found themselves. We might also have a more demonstrable conception of the distance of historical context in relation to our awareness of our modern society. Recall here our reference to Bataille from earlier. Just prior to the aforementioned section, Bataille says, quote, "If our modern world is compared to worlds gone by, it is hideous and appears as the most failed of all." End quote. Not only has history slipped away from us, insofar as we have no measure of value on the larger scale except the extent to which we can engage in economic exchange, but we have lost a chance at a better world, a lost future a la Fischerian hauntology. Thus, when viewing an old site, we are viewing the persistent specter of a possible world, and if we squint hard enough, we just might sense the emotional trauma of the death of that world, a world that, for us, never was. This quality of our phenomenological experience of the world is problematic and has affected all of our experiences, not only our experience of history. There is an aspect of which we can recognize the palimpsest of history, we can see the traces of what it once was and could have been based on a cursory understanding from books or some other academic manner. This aspect is very weak, however, for the same reasons the places themselves have ceased to have contextual use or meaning. More acutely, the effect rendered by the procession of simulacra and thus the phenomenological is now so ingrained and reinforced in our reality that it has become irreversible. The simulacra of our reality is now shifting, irrespective to anything but itself and the subconscious economic awareness we have of it. Even the concept of reality is a simulacrum, ceasing to have actual value except by which capital might increase or smooth its flow. Symptoms of this can be seen in things like the dandy, the flaneur, cosplayers, Japanese Westaboos and greasers, and also psychogeographers. These examples, and countless others, are attempts at subjectification in a world wherein the subject is no longer the measure by which we find meaning. It is arguable if there even was a self to begin with, but rather some collection of qualities and characteristics agreeable to a healthy operation within a community or society, with the importance actually being placed primarily on the latter. In a sense, this is the focus of psychogeography. Its goal is the attempt to get back to the actual material and community of an urban environment. It is a method by which we can come to understand our communities and engage in urban planning, consider the reasons why they are organized as they are, and a manner in which we can maintain the social assemblages present. The psychogeographer is concerned with ease of travel during walking, ambiance to ambiance on aimless strolls, the character of places and neighborhoods, and the ways in which we can indulge in the experience of the places we find ourselves. Even a place we may have lived our entire life can become different when approached in this way. It is an engagement with a place as it is, with people as they are, thus engagement with existential elements. What strange paths can open up to us, what back alleyways and second-story patios, what conversations can be had over a cigarette and coffee. It creates the conditions by which chance can have space to engage us with our surroundings. The weird, eerie, and liminal, while emotionally insecure and scary, specifically within capitalism, become enticing, engaging, and adventurous psychogeographically. This creates a rupture for us in the ways we can exist in the world, at least psychologically, giving a brief respite from the tidal draws of economy. So we return back to the headlessness of the Dérive compared with the intention required by the psychogeographer. While seemingly at odds, it is the context given by psychogeography that provides the opportunity for headless chance to create significant moments. But at the end of the day, and pardon me, but the question has to be asked, what's the fucking point if it is all captured through capital? The point of travel ideally has the same character as a successful dérive, to see and experience new things. When we mix intention and chance and give life the opportunity to expand on itself by its own means, we can get a closer approximation of that in which we can find value. In place of walking to a destination for a picture, fear of missing out, or crowds, we have the journey and a method to entrain into it more effectively. What psychogeography and the Dérive offer is not a solution to a problem per se. Effectively, the problem outlined here is not solvable by any means. Capital and the resulting continual necessity of simulated objects and experiences, up to and way beyond simulacra, is the god of this world. What we gain through the use of psychogeography is a methodology of rupture and an opportunity to interrupt the persistent stranglehold of capital. As it presently stands, an operational definition of existence in relation could be the continual reinforcement of isolation to the subject, to the extent that one must engage economically in order to break free of this isolation. A methodology of rupture engenders flux between the perceived and the one perceiving, and an experience closer to the non-subjective, the becoming of a person of the environment, not in the environment. And to be a part of a whole in an urban sense, that must require walking.